All right. I'm going to go first. Sorry, Jeremy and Eric. I jumped in there. I'm Mark. I'm a third-year PhD student in Matt Pasik's lab. And I guess some of what we work on and what I work on are we study how cells change their sugary coat on their outside surface in an effort to promote better behavior in aggressive cancer types. So we're really interested in understanding some of the underlying mechanisms and how cells change to try and adapt to a different environment and how that regulates stuff on the cell surface.
So hi everyone, my name is Jeremy Keys. I'm a fourth-year graduate student in Jan's lab, and I study the migration of cancer cells through confined spaces. We use a lot of microfluidic devices to sort of mimic the in vivo geometries that cells need to migrate through, and I study how the nucleus is squeezed through those tight pores during migration.
All right, and hey guys, my name's Eric. I'm a first year in the BME department. I recently also joined Matt Pasik's lab, so Mark and I know each other quite well. I'm currently studying lentiviral vector production in cells that are overly expressing these glycoproteins in their cell membranes. So I guess this is probably a good time to start with the questions from prospective students. Jeremy and Mark, I don't know about you guys, but I've got the chat open, so I'll keep an eye out for questions coming in through the chat.
I'll keep my chat open as well, just to keep an eye on things.
Sure.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I guess I will wax poetic about one of the things that I think we do really well in terms of the cellular and molecular as a department. And I see the question in the chat now, so I'm just going to keep this brief. But I think one of the things that I found really useful, and I know that Jeremy and I just came back from, is we have something on campus called PSOC. So we have what's called the Physical Sciences and Oncology Center. It's one of 10 around the country. And it's essentially just a cohort of us that work collaboratively as a community for cancer-related research. And what's kind of great about it, and I know Jeremy can speak to this maybe more personally than I can, and just like the collaborative nature and how many different groups that we have working on projects. So Jeremy recently-ish went down to Genelia and did some work at an HHMI facility there, which is an incredible facility that we might not have had the opportunity to work at without some of the collaborative networks that exist at Cornell. So it's really great from that perspective of working with a diverse set of scientists and kind of building up to do the best work possibly that you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to echo what Mark was saying, one of the things that Cornell does really excel at is the cooperation between different lab groups and just the immense amount of resources that we have on campus. So, I mean, in addition to just what we have in Weil between the microscopy core that's in the basement, where we have, you know, every type of microscopy you can need outside of somewhere that develops their own microscopy tools, like Genelia Farms at HHMI. We also have the vet school, which is, you know, one of the best vet schools in the world in case you're more interested in working in animal models. I know people who work with rats and mice, and I know they have like monkeys and horses and stuff. If you're more interested in like tendon research, I think they use maybe tendons for that. Anyway, not my area of research. But we also work with the Center for Nanofabrication, which allows us to make custom microfluidic devices, and just a number of opportunities for collaboration and cooperation, I think, is pretty unique in terms of what Cornell has. I often joke, if you needed a particle accelerator for your research, I don't understand why you would, but we do have one. So yeah, really just a number of resources are great. So somebody asked, could you tell us a bit about the personality of your PIs? So my PI, I think you've been able to interact with him a bit already. Jan is a very friendly guy. Very good at fostering collaborations because he's very social, and he's very good at, you know, just taking up whatever problem comes around. He will either put you in contact with whoever you need to solve the issue, or if you have problems that get in the way of your own research, he will point you in the right direction to keep things going. And I guess you two can tell about Matt Pasik.
So I guess I'll go first because I'm a bit older than Eric and I have seniority or something. That's how these things work. But kind of echoing, and I think this is kind of what Cornell does a good job of fostering, and at least I noticed this in comparison to like when I was going around different schools, but I think the fostering in collaborative environment comes a lot from the people that we work for. You know, in my personal case, part of the reason I work for Matt specifically is because when I was first joining, I was like, I want to do this specific thing, and I have this idea, and he's like, that's cool. We can try doing that. And that's not what I work on now, but I really appreciated having the opportunity to like kind of pitch my own idea. So that's like something specifically I work for. It's hard to say on like a person-to-person basis. I know people work on projects because like funding is such a big issue in terms of like funding is like a really direct stakeholder, and you can't really go too far out from what you are actually being paid to work on to some extent. So you might be more limited in scope, but what I found really great and most of the PIs that I worked with was that I was given the opportunity to pursue projects that I specifically kind of proposed myself and was more interested in myself.
All right, so yeah, so Mark has seniority in the Patrick lab over me, so he knows Matt better than I do at this point. But I know, at least from my first impressions working with Matt, is he's very approachable, which is something I like in a PI. I agree with Mark. He definitely does encourage exploration within the but also a little bit without the scope of our lab, which is always really great. And like Jeremy and Mark pointed out, I think speaks to the collaborative spirit at Cornell. I think honestly, approachability is something that a lot of the PIs share. And they also, I liked coming here and seeing just how many of the PIs really don't care what your background in research was. And that applies to my PI, Matt, and it also applies to several of the other PIs, including all the ones that I rotated with. I think during my first year at Cornell, I've met a total of one professor who actually cared like what my undergraduate background is. So I think one of the strengths of PIs here in general is just that they just value people who are curious, intellectually curious, and they don't care what you did in your past undergraduate life. Just if you're curious and you're driven, they'll teach you.
I'm going to kind of jump in here too, because I think this is a good point that applies for all of us. And I think Jeremy as well was a mechanical engineer in his background. So my background was in like physics and chemistry, and now I'm a cell biologist. So I think that point speaks really well again of like, you can kind of find your niche in everything and find what you're interested in, even if what you're interested in is not something you've done previously. And also that isn't to say there are also tons of people that do a really good job of succeeding in places where they've already succeeded and building upon that. But it's not that you're limited into like having pigeonholed yourself into a project because in my senior year in college, I did this, so this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case. I mean, a lot of people I've heard in both this weekend and the previous weekend sort of bringing up the, my background is in such and such. I'm vaguely interested in, let's say I did cancer in undergrad, I'm vaguely interested in the microbiome and like single cell sequencing stuff in grad school. This is not like undergrad where you have to take, 5 classes, 20 credits at a time. You're spending all of your time researching one thing. You can become an expert in something much quicker than you think you can. And that is a lot of what PIs look for when they're selecting people to come into the program, is find people who seem self-motivated, who seem intellectually curious, and are able to investigate problems on their own. That's really what the skill is that you're trying to develop in your PhD. And so really just keep an eye out for any lab that interests you. Feel free to take a look and talk to the PIs. They can tell you everything and more than what you need to know. Any other questions you have about either the facilities we have or, particular PIs? We're not going to talk trash or anything. But anything you'd like to know, we're really happy to help or point you in the direction of. Or if you still have like general questions about living in Ithaca or working at Cornell, we're happy to answer those questions as well.
I guess something I'll speak to here now in the open spaces, and again, anyone is welcome to stop me because this is in light of questions, but, and if we have one here, that'd be great. But I guess one of the things that is really great for the cellular and molecular engineering is that the field faculty lets you work for anyone you kind of want to, so long as they've given one seminar, which almost every faculty has that does relevant research in that area. In BME. So for example, when I first joined Cornell, I didn't actually rotate in any labs in BME or that were directly BME affiliated. I rotated with labs that were exclusively affiliated through chemical engineering, and they all work in cellular and molecular engineering. And you have the opportunity to work with them, and it gives you like a much wider range of PI. Like I think over the course of the program, there've probably been like 80 to 90 different PIs that people have worked with. When I was in my first year, someone gave a work in progress talk on like solid state physics, essentially. And that's like something that people can do that's still within the scope of the program. And here specifically in cellular and molecular engineering, there's lots of different opportunities, not just within, but also in biological engineering, chemical engineering, and even like biology and those types of programs themselves. There are faculty that are willing to take students from all these different areas.
When you guys choose to take courses, do you choose based on what you expect to be needed for your research, or just anything that sounds interesting?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The PhD program is very not class focused, I would say. I believe right now, correct me if you guys know anything else, but there's 1 or 2 required courses at this point, in addition to, I believe, 2 seminars. One is a work in progress seminar where you just give updates on your research after your 2nd year, I think generally, and one where it's just visiting professors come to talk about their research. So really the only courses that I think you should be taking after the required ones in your first year are things that you think are really genuinely necessary for pursuing your work. So let's say if you're like me and you came into the department as a mechanical engineer, obviously I'm going to be fairly weak in cell biology at the beginning, right? So taking some biochemistry courses or something that's specifically on, let's say, cancer biology is really helpful because it can really fill in all of those gaps that I'm not picking up just by reading literature, right? But if you just want to take a math class for fun, you can audit courses, but it's not something I would recommend. You really want to be spending most of your time on the research project, because you would be surprised how much more you can learn just in focusing in on the literature that's relevant, rather than taking a course which is going to maybe touch upon that literature in some capacity, but not really give you exactly what you need to know.
So for reference, in your first year, you do have a little bit more time as you're selecting labs, and you can pretty much get away with taking whatever you want to. So personally, I tried taking a graduate organic chemistry class, having like not done a whole ton of organic chemistry. Did not go great, and I dropped it pretty quickly. But like they let me sign up for it, and I showed up to the lectures. So, and yeah, in a similar vein to Jeremy, I had no like real experience with like biochemistry. I took a graduate biochemistry class in my first semester, and that was like kind of also the perfect time to do that, because in your first semester you have a little bit more time and it's a good time to like catch up to things. And then lastly, in terms of the overall course load, I have like 4 courses that I've taken over the course of my PhD cumulatively. And like, it's really, even like I work in a pretty biophysics-y area. I took a class on biophysics, and it's just like, even getting the crossover between like a class that has a title for things you expect versus your research, it's not always going to be like one-to-one. There's going to be some exclusivity between it. So it really comes to how much you value your time working in a research environment versus like learning extra stuff that's like fun to know, but might not be relevant to like your day-to-day progression, your progression through your degree.
And as a slight aside to that, you can also, if you're into just, having fun with your class time, you can also take phys ed courses because there are a ton available at Cornell. I know people who've taken like yoga or rock climbing, or I took a beginner's tennis course, just additional things that you can do to fill in your time in between experiments.
Cool. And for undergrad, grade is very important, but for grad school, do we care about grade, or is just you got to pass it? That's it.
Is
So
Jan
I'm
still
gonna-
on the call right now? Oh, sorry. Jan makes a joke frequently about the grades.
Should I get off the call quickly?
No, it's a good joke. I think it's always useful to repeat. If you want to get an A in the course, you're welcome to get an A in the course and put the time in. But like, really, all you need to do is pass your degree. And Jan's frequently like, if you got an A in the course, were you really putting your time into the research, even as like a bit of a joke? But it's just like, you're coming to graduate school to do your research. And really the only times that grades are going to be relevant over the scope of things is when you're applying to fellowships. And even then, it's like such a minor part of what you're doing overall that like the time commitment that you're putting into it. It's really, and it's something that people struggle with frequently when they're transitioning to, is like figuring out how to balance their research versus their school, because like the immediacy of classes makes it seem like a more pressing concern, whereas your research is probably actually your major focus over the course of your degree.
So I'm going to jump in here. Alicia asked in the chat, what are the graduate classes like? Is it combined with undergrads? So I'll answer the second part of that question first with the dreaded "it depends." Most of the courses I've taken so far, which granted I'm in my first year, so that's not tons, but they've mostly been graduate students only. That being said, there are some graduate courses that are open to undergrads, mostly seniors, some juniors to take. One good example of a popular course that's like that is Dr. Putnam's drug delivery course. So that course is in both the BME and is it the Chemi or Chemistry? I forget, departments. So they open that one up to some undergrads. It generally doesn't affect anything but the size of the course. Also, you may see something like actually having exams in a course like that. So that ties into what are the graduate classes like. And so I think the biggest difference that I've seen in my first year coming from undergrad is that you're treated like you have a lot more academic responsibility, but you're also treated a lot more like you have a lot more maturity as well. So what I mean by that is some of the courses you'll never have a single exam. So many of us, coming from undergrad, we're used to the paradigm of exams being sort of the way that we're held accountable for the learning. And a lot of graduate courses, at least the ones I've had the experience to take so far, haven't been like that. There's a lot more focus on the literature and understanding the current state of the science rather than the established knowledge, like, conservative, like DNA replication is conservative kind of stuff that, has been known for, the better part of 50 years, and the textbooks are always behind and things like that. So it's a lot more focus on the current literature, the current state of the fields. There's a lot more emphasis on presentations, I think, at least in the courses that I've taken. Jeremy and Mark might have information otherwise, but there's a lot more emphasis on presentations, being able to present what you've learned. For example, I'm taking, Jeremy mentioned some required courses in the first year. So one of those is a core concepts in disease course that you take as sort of a preparatory class for the summer immersion term, so that you can get a better idea of how biomedical engineering and human diseases are tied together. And the way that course is structured is you are part of a group of 2 or 3 students who are given the responsibility to do research in the current scientific literature about this particular disease. And then you go out, you explore, you learn sort of for yourself what is out there, and then you come and put together a presentation that you give to the rest of the class. So like that's one example of how one of the required courses at least is structured. But like everything, it varies.
And I think we can answer this, what made you choose the lab you're in? Because I think that is a pretty relevant part of just, doing grad school is the place where you're going to work, all of the time. On that note, I think what's really important in choosing a lab is making sure that you get along with everyone in your lab, or at least most people in your lab. Lab groups are big. I like everyone in my lab, for the record. Hi, Jan. But finding a PI who you're good at communicating with, who seems to really care about your progress and development as a researcher, as well as people who you can see yourself collaborating with in the lab. People you can get along with, you can bounce ideas off of, compare notes with your experiments. Can be really beneficial to fostering your way as you go forward. What made me choose the lab that I'm in is that it is a very collaborative group. It's a lot of people who are very supportive of each other and just generally friendly. I think everybody who knows our lab knows we're a pretty active, friendly group of people. And I would say similarly of most labs around. But understanding how you fit into the lab culture is a big part of what you should be looking at while you're selecting and looking at labs.
All right, so Mark, do you want to go first, or
Go ahead. Mine's a silly.
Okay, I'll go first then. So yeah, I think like Jeremy was saying, one of the most common responses, if not the most common response, I think you'll hear to this question, Justin, and others who are curious, is the people. I remember in my visit weekend and then also in recruitment, that question came up frequently, and almost always the people or the lab culture, something of that ilk, was the very first response. So the advice I would have, at least that is related to that, is don't limit yourself based on your research interests. I mean, or because obviously, maybe prioritize your research interests, but definitely don't limit yourself just to what you think you're interested in, or even better is don't limit yourself based on what you have experience in, certainly. As far as what made me choose the lab that I'm in, incidentally, I just told you don't limit yourself based on your past experience, but actually for me, past experience was a big part of it. Oh, it looks like we might have a question from Sebastian. Possibly not. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. For me, I came into Cornell with a sort of widespread of potential research interests, and then ultimately I rotated in Matt's lab, where I was doing a lot of work that was similar to an extent to work that I had done in undergrad. And it just so happened that for me, having that solid foundation from undergrad was very beneficial. It helped more than I had appreciated originally, with like confidence in knowing that I can do things, I can contribute meaningfully to the lab, things like that. So yeah, I think people first. The shared sense of values in the lab, I think, is going to be the most important for finding a good long-term fit. And then after that, it's really an evaluation on what your interests are, how important is your background to you personally, which is something you'll sort of discover about yourself as you go through the rotation process. And a third thing is mentorship style. People will often cite their mentors. Some of the students will say that they just connected really well with the PI, sometimes even personally. And that varies lab to lab based on, you know, the PI's management style. But finding, I mean, you know, this PI is going to be your advisor and your best advocate for the next 5 to 6 years, give or take. So finding a good fit with your mentor is a very, very important criterion for choosing a lab.
So I literally joined Matt's lab because I thought he was the nicest person I interacted with. I would not recommend exclusively basing your criteria based on that, but I don't know. I'm the kind of person that I've always just, I think everything's interesting. So for me, it was mostly about like the personal relationships because I don't know, every time I go to a talk, I'm always like, wow, research is so cool. So all I really cared about was, you know, kind of clicking on like I guess both emotional and like how we think about things level with the people I was going to work with. And I wish I had a better answer than that, but that's kind of the truth about it.
Any other final questions? I think we're pretty much out of time, but we'll be happy to, you know, answer anything. Feel free to look us up and send us an email if there's anything about any one of these labs that you'd like to know more about.
And yeah, in general, I think everyone's pretty accessible. I know you're welcome to, as Jeremy said, I don't know if we want to type out, or if you guys have our emails and stuff, but I'll put mine in the chat.
We won't be upset if you find us.
Yeah. And you're welcome literally to ask anything. I'm sure you'll see a bit more of us throughout the course of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Well, just for taking the time. If you have, as prospective students, if you have any question about specific labs or any of the students, just if you cannot find the email addresses, just send me an email. I can connect you to them as well. I can connect you to additional labs as well. And I think you can also otherwise use the GroupMe. I think most people are on the GroupMe as well if you have questions there as well. So I think with that, we'll, I think, conclude this session. I think students, at least I know I have to go off to individual faculty meetings. I think student faculty meetings, I think several of the students as well. So thank you, everybody. And then just, yeah, we'll talk to each other soon. Bye-bye.
Have a good virtual visit, everyone.
Yep. Bye.